Good afternoon, everybody. Good morning to those of you on the West Coast. Uh, Welcome to the Leaders Coaching Mirror. I'm Erin Osborne, Operations Manager with Nexa Learning. I'll be here working behind the scenes during this morning's webinar to monitor your questions and comments and chat. We want to thank HR Professionals Magazine for collaborating with us on this webinar. The webinar has been granted one SHRM recertification hour and one HRCI recertification credit hour. HR Professionals Magazine is recognized by SHRM and HRCI to offer recertification. The certification information will be included in the post-webinar email sent within 2 business days of the webinar, along with the webinar recording and a survey. Now, few ways to interact today. We are going to be interacting with chat and with the React feature so that you can, if you have those, you see that. I want to introduce our presenter today, Doug Bender. He is SPHR and an executive coach, leadership consultant, author, and adjunct associate professor at the University of Southern California's Bovard College. He has coached leaders at every level, helping them build stronger teams, navigate change, and create workplace cultures where many people thrive. Before becoming a full-time coach, Doug held senior HR leadership roles with several Fortune 500 organizations, giving him firsthand insight into the real challenges leaders face every day. Known for blending practical experience with thoughtful leadership insights, Doug specializes in executive coaching, organizational culture, emotional intelligence, and leadership development. He is the award-winning author of the ABCs of Leadership and has spent more than 3 decades helping managers discover that the most powerful coaching tool isn't a technique, it's the leader in the mirror. Doug, the camera is all yours.
Great. Thank you so much. I really, really appreciate that. And thanks for the warm introduction. Hello, everyone, wherever you are. And I agree with Erin. It is, I guess, it might still be just a little bit early for somebody out on the West Coast, but hopefully our journey together today is one that you might find some great value in. I know that I have. It is true. Over the years, I've learned an awful lot about organizations, their culture, and their leadership. And in fact, along the way, I learned an awful lot about me. I was fairly successful in my executive leadership roles when I worked for Fortune 500 companies. But the answer may surprise you in terms of why I felt that way. I think I made almost every mistake that a senior HR professional could make. But it was because of that, I was able to leverage those things and turn those into successes. And it began to make me feel very, very curious about what is it that allows people to be powerful, and especially individuals in leadership roles, supervisors, managers, leaders. I kind of lump everybody under that same moniker of leadership. And so today, I think we can have a wonderful, wonderful opportunity to dive in a little bit on a topic that most folks don't really have the opportunity to slow down enough to think about, or even get a chance to reflect upon. And so, our learning objectives today is fairly simple because it really is about our emotional intelligence, what we know about ourselves. So we'll learn a little bit today about sort of the whole notion of self-perception and self-awareness and the nuanced difference between the two, I would say. Hopefully, there'll be some tools, some tips, some aha moments that will allow you the opportunity to be able to lean in just a little bit more in increasing your own level of self-awareness to become more effective and intentional about how you, as leaders, can help coach others. And in the process, build trust, improve coaching conversations, and improve performance. And so the gates of the conversation go something like this because it's all sort of one way. I'm always used to two-way conversation. But we've built some things into this whole process today that might allow us to have a conversation anyway. It'll just be more of a digital kind of a conversation. So we'll talk a bit about self-awareness. What actually really is it? Emotional intelligence, what is that? And then we'll chat a bit about four things that I think is really critically important for you to understand the whole picture as it relates to emotional intelligence. And then we'll talk a little bit about some of those things that I mentioned earlier as it relates to some tips and some techniques. We'll talk about habits of highly emotionally intelligent people as well. If there's some time at the end, we'll try to entertain some questions if you happen to have them. Again, we encourage that. And so let's dive right in. And we'll start really with just a rudimentary poll if we can. If you don't mind, please respond to this. Who's with us today? Where are you in terms of your role? Are you in HR, learning and development? You're just a leader trying to maybe pick up a couple of new things. Just work with us on this, and we'll get the results in a second. If you all can see each other out there in the chat feature, maybe you just put your name in there along with where you're located. Who's with us today? I see some folks are putting some things out there in the chat feature. Hopefully they're answering the poll as well. We're continuing to get some responses. Let's see what we got. HR. Okay, 45% of folks are in HR, but there's another really interesting category there. 33% of the folks fall into the other category, probably some of those leaders and managers that I was talking about a little bit earlier. Okay, thank you for that. I appreciate it. Let's see here. All right. So let's begin at the beginning, shall we? I think everybody knows this infamous character by the name of Aristotle. I, I think, and I'm going to hopefully get this right because there's a correct way to pronounce it. Originally, Aristotle was credited with saying this: "Naughty Seaton, naughty Seaton," which is Greek for "know yourself." And of course, he's credited with being able to articulate that and expand that a little bit more by saying this: knowing yourself is truly the beginning of all wisdom. So we're going to maybe try to get a little bit more wisdom today as we go on this journey together. So another question for you. On a scale of 1 to 10, how well do you think you know yourself? What is your level of self-awareness? Now, the question is yours, right? Just for you to honestly answer for yourself. On a scale of 1 to 10, what is your level of self-awareness? Maybe give it a couple more seconds for folks to respond. And be honest. Don't try to undercut yourself at all. Are we getting some good response there?
We are, Doug. We have about 72% participated so far. I'm just about
Fantastic.
ready to end the poll
Fantastic.
here in just a second.
Fantastic. I'm really curious about this.
All right. All right, 75% have participated. Let me go ahead and end the poll and share the results.
Let's see. Yeah, this is pretty good. This is pretty good. So let's see. On a scale of 1 to 10, about 42% of us say that we know ourselves. We have a pretty decent level of self-awareness. They're probably a pretty good representative group. About 13% that said that they know themselves fairly well. And there's this robust 5% who says that they know themselves perfectly well. Well, this is a good starting point. I want you to kind of carry that with you as we go through the remainder of our conversation together, because I think it's really critically important. We'll talk more about that in a minute. So I wanted to start with this slide in particular. Most of you, I think, I hope, would know Simon Oliver Sinek. Simon is not really from the United States. He's from the UK, but he's known globally for his thought leadership and his work in organizational development and organizational leadership. And he did a YouTube video that I was super interested in. We won't play that video for you now. We were hoping to be able to share it with you because it's only probably less than 2 minutes. And here's his story. He was sharing with the interviewer that one of the things that he was confronted with as this global thought leader in organizational leadership and organizational development and organizational effectiveness. He was having a conversation with his girlfriend who said to him, "You don't listen." That really caught him off guard. And of course, some of us can kind of relate to that because I kind of get told frequently I don't listen. But the truth of the matter is that it really threw him off guard because he listens for a living. And I think that's true for most of us on this call right now. In some way, shape, form, or fashion, listening is an incredible leadership competency to have. And so he couldn't really quite understand that. And he decided to dive into it just a little bit deeper. And what he found was this: when it came to his work, working with organizational leaders around the globe, a part of his superpower was, in fact, being able to listen well to the concerns and the issues and the challenges and the opportunities that others present to him. And he is able to reflect that in such a way that he could help those folks be more successful at what they do. But what he also learned was that when it came to friends and family and those who were close to him, he really wasn't a very good listener at all. That was a cardinal moment in his life when he recognized that he wasn't as self-aware as he thought he was. Self-awareness really is truly the key to self-mastery. And even though you might be really a good listener in one lane, in one level, in another, we might be surprised. And so that really kind of helps us in many ways to really kind of lean into the conversation as it relates to emotional intelligence, right? Emotional intelligence defined as that ability, that capacity to be able to be more aware of and to be able to thoughtfully express your emotions and to handle relationships in a way that is intentional and in a way that is effective. That's emotional intelligence and defined, if you will. The term came about 35 years or so ago by a couple of consultants and academic leaders in the field, Meyer and Salovey. But this is really interesting to me too, because a little bit later on, if you will, the folks at Harvard sort of extended the definition of emotional intelligence, and they said this: it's defined as those skills that can help us recognize and understand, and the ability to be able to manage our own emotions, but also the emotions of others. That was an eye opener for me. I do believe that at the end of the day, if we can't manage those things for ourselves, it might be pretty hard to manage those things for others. So then it stands to reason, if we can't manage those things for ourselves because we don't see those things in ourselves, our self-awareness or the lack thereof, it might make us just a little bit less effective in how we show up in relationships with others as a leader. So we've got a little bit of a workshop quiz here, if you don't mind. I call it the Know Thyself reality check. I mean, quite frankly, you can go on the World Wide Web, or I don't know, maybe even Chat GTP, I suppose, and you can come up with any number of quizzes and lists out there. This is just one of many. But I thought it might be a good opportunity and it may be a good way to get us to think a little bit more deeply about ourselves. And so there are 5 questions here that you can see. I just want to invite you to grab your favorite writing instrument and a piece of paper, sticky notes. I keep a million of them right here on my desk in front of me. And I want you to just give yourself permission right now. Maybe a little bit boring, but I don't think so. Give yourself permission right now to just kind of walk through quickly each one of these 5 questions. I don't think it'll take a lot of time, right? So, your strengths and weaknesses, list your top 3, just one word that identifies your top 3 strengths. I call them superpowers, right? Everybody's got one, at least one. So, what's your top 3 strengths and your top 3 weaknesses? Just one word that might describe it, maybe 2 words at the most. I'll give you just a couple more seconds. I know somebody's over there writing very frantically out there on the West Coast. Now, um, this particular sort of quiz calls it the guilty question. I don't really call it the guilty question, but this is something that I'm really fascinated about. When was the last time you made a mistake at work or in a relationship for that matter? And at the end of the day, excuse me, what was the very first thing that you thought? Now, the good news about all of this is that it's all about self-reflection, right? You can be honest with yourself. When was the last time you made a mistake at work or in a relationship? And what was the very first thing you thought? Why did I do that? Why did they treat me that way? This isn't my fault. Maybe it wasn't. All right. Number 3, the feedback loop. What's the most common piece of negative feedback you have received? The most common piece of negative feedback you've received from at least 3 different people in your life. Doesn't matter when it happened. It's just the idea is to try to reflect on what might have been the most common piece of feedback that wasn't so favorable. Okay, and now question 4 is this, the trigger check. Describe a situation in the last week, only in the last week, where you felt like you might have been defensive, angry, frustrated, annoyed, anxious, those kinds of things. And this is the most important part. What was that thought that came into your mind that triggered that emotion? What were you thinking when you triggered that emotion? And now finally this. We call it the time value mismatch. That might be sort of leading the witness, so to speak. But let's try this, right? So, I mean, we all have things that we really truly value deeply. But I'm only interested in you identifying just the top 3 life values that you have, the things that are most important to you, whether it's family, faith, health, career, fill in the blank, right? List those top 3 things. You might end up with a list of top 2, and that's okay. And so the question still, though, becomes listing how you spent your time over the last week, and then asking yourself the question, do they line up? How did you spend the majority of your time in the last 7 days? And did that line up with what you identify as your top 3 life values? All right, let's keep moving. So here's a sort of reactions to that. And this is just sort of guideposts, some things to kind of help us reflect, to help us look in the mirror. In terms of the strengths and weaknesses question, if your strengths sounded like, if I'm sorry, if your weaknesses sounded like the sky's strengths, then you might be experiencing a self-awareness gap. Maybe. In terms of the guilty question, if instead of choosing A, what was I thinking? If you chose B or C, well, maybe you might be a little bit defensive rather than truly willing to assess your actions. And three, with the feedback loop, if you can't think of anything and you kind of dismissed it as, well, maybe they just don't understand it, you might be hiding something from yourself, or you may not be willing to look it in the face for what it is. And then the trigger check, that one thing that may have happened that really triggered your emotions, made you feel annoyed, made you feel frustrated, made you feel fill in the blank. But if you can only describe the situation and not what you were thinking in the moment, really deep down inside, that made you go that way, then you might not be aware of your own psychological triggers. I know I have some. And then the time value mismatch question really just wants to beg the discussion about most of us, where we're sort of underbuyers of our own faults and overbuyers of our own good intentions. And I can tell you very early on in my career, one of the things that I was really, 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 really sensitive about was always being perfect. I always wanted to have the right answers. I never wanted to be wrong. And little did I know at that time that that was the worst thing that I could do for my own professional development. Of course, over time, I learned to sort of embrace the fact that most of us don't really truly learn, or at least not learn well and learn optimally unless we're willing to embrace those things, to really look ourselves in the mirror and say, this happened. I acknowledge it fully that it happened. And what can I learn from it? So that's the Know Thyself reality check. Hopefully, it's got you thinking a little bit really intentionally and really seriously about those things and what it might mean. Because it really is a matter of self-awareness, self-perception versus self-awareness. Am I seeing myself as I really am? Now, let's just be really uber clear about this. Self-perception is really how I see myself. It's my picture for me and how I think I show up, right? I think all of us have fairly healthy self perceptions of ourselves. The question becomes whether or not the way you see yourself is really the way that you are. And self awareness, if you will, allows you to be more realistic most of the time as to how you actually show up, your behaviors, your emotions, how you deal with other people. That's true self awareness as opposed to self perception. It's a difficult question to answer because there are a lot of things that kind of go through the filter, right? Some of it has to do with pride. I probably would be freely willing to admit these days that probably in my younger years I had a lot of that. But there's also other things, right? Like our fears and our insecurities about how well we show up, how well we show up as coworkers, how well we show up as significant others, how well we show up as nurturers and leaders. A lot of it has to do with our past experiences. When we have a certain sort of a negative experience in the past, particularly as it might relate to a different group, maybe it's a different group of people who look differently than you do, or someone who has a serious faith walk that might be very different from yours. But all of those things sort of come together, if you will, to inform not just who we are, but how we think. And there was a great thought leader who was at Harvard and Yale, now that I think about it, and he studied the field of organizational development and organizational leadership for many decades. Chris Agiris, I call it Agyris, I think. An incredibly interesting man with a huge body of work. And he says um, this whole notion of self-awareness really creates a conflict or a gap when you have an espoused theory, what we say, in other words, the reasons that we give for our actions versus what we actually do. When those two things don't line up, that gap is critically important. That's a self-awareness gap, right? And of course, self-awareness is pretty simple, right? It's just noticing that gap and trying to figure out ways to keep it as narrow as possible, to keep it as aligned as possible. And so this matters, right? Because at the end of the day, your competency as a leader, that's a good word, competency. Your competency as a leader, one who inherently has an opportunity and a responsibility to help others be the best version of themselves. That's not just about what you know and what you do. It's also about how aware you are of how you're helping people do that. But if you're not there and completely aware, then it's very, very difficult to help other people be there and aware. And so there's some real good, not just clinical, but also just sort of bottom line business case kinds of reasons for emotional intelligence and why it matters, right? The coach-client relationship, the leader employee relationship is actually strongest when there is effectiveness there from the standpoint of coaching. But again, that assumes that the person has a high level of self-awareness. Um, there's another body of research that shows that leaders with high emotional intelligence have a tendency to produce much better results across performance and employee morale and satisfaction, lower levels of stress in the workplace. You know, we did that little straw poll a little bit earlier because we saw almost consistently what the researchers see globally. 95% of the people usually think that they are self-aware when really, truly, only about 10 or 15% actually are. Now, listen, that's not a criticism. And that's certainly not an intended disrespect. That's a real opportunity. That's an eye opener. Um, I think we all at one point in time or another, we know that we can be better. We know that we can do better. But to the extent that we know what that gap looks like, we don't know. But the research tells us we all should probably be aware of the fact that we don't know what we don't know. And that's the reason why things like this, conversations like this, reflections like this, meditative moments like this really matter. And so this brings us to our next a little quick straw poll. The question is this, and this is kind of sort of, again, leading the witness. There are four things to consider as it relates to emotional intelligence: self-awareness, social awareness, self-management, and relationship management. They're kind of sort of all four of them pretty much self-explanatory. And so to the extent that you understand all four of these, what's your response? What do you think is the most important aspect of EQ? It's just a good conversation question. What do you think is the most important? Self-awareness, social awareness, self-management, or relationship management? We're curious. Just give me a heads up, gang, when you think we've got enough. Just flash our results on the screen.
Here we have about almost 75%. So
Ah,
we're still
wonderful.
coming in.
Thank you all for participating. Get just a few more folks moving.
Yep, we're about at 80% here
Beautiful.
in the poll.
Let's see what our answers are. Drum roll. Yay, look at this. 65% say self-awareness. There are some who say social awareness. 16% says self-management and 14% relationship management. Thank you very much. It wasn't really intended to be a trick question. I appreciate that. What we know is that all four of these things really truly matter. But again, the question really was, what is the most important aspect? And so let's get to it. Let's see what's there, right? Again, all of these things make up emotional intelligence. And so all four components are important. But if there is one that might be maybe a bit more important than the others, it just might be self-awareness. And so I want to just take a little bit of time with you all to just kind of walk through what these definitions are, because I think they're really critically important for us to be on the same level in terms of our understanding. And this isn't just my definitions, by the way. This is what the thought leaders would suggest. Self-awareness, as we alluded to a bit earlier, that's just simply understanding what your own thoughts and, I mean, just very accurately, what your own thoughts and feelings, values and beliefs and actions represent. Um, when you can understand those things, the important lesson here is that you get to respond in a more thoughtful, intelligent, and a much more disciplined way when you're engaged with others, even when you're just simply engaged with self. That's self-awareness. Social awareness, it's a little bit different because that's just the ability to accurately notice the emotions of others. I had a really interesting client. Actually, I'm still working with this client. And some of the leadership developmental feedback that this particular client was receiving was incredibly interesting because the person got some 360-degree feedback. So it wasn't just coming from the boss, it was coming from coworkers. Some of the anecdotal information would suggest that it was also from friends and even from subordinates. And the constant refrain was, this person doesn't read the room very well. And so I thought that that was interesting. And in fact, last night when I was preparing some of my notes for today's conversation, I started chuckling to myself because I had a real live example that I'm working with right now in this moment who is not socially aware. Now, this isn't just about like how do you act and respond at the family cookout, you know, the this past Saturday afternoon or at a cocktail hour. It's not that kind of social, if you will. But it's social awareness in the sense of interacting with others, but your ability to be able to notice what's going on in real time with others. Some of that can manifest itself in so many different ways. For example, writing emails and maybe not being thoughtful about what it is, the tone and the spin in what you're sharing, the messaging in the email, because it's landing the wrong way with the audience. Or it might even be something as simple as not really truly understanding who it is that should be included in the conversation in the room. Social awareness. But then there's self-management, the ability to control your own dysfunctional emotions and impulses so that you can respond thoughtfully to others. I think we've all kind of heard that beautiful saying that, listen, I can't control how other people act. I can only control how I respond to it. And the truth of the matter is that if you're a leader and people see you show up leading with your emotions. That's very different than being an empath, right? But you're showing up with your emotions in such an uncontrolled way that is actually being disruptive to effective performance. That's an issue. It's also an opportunity. So self-management is about emotional control and being able to be flexible, particularly when things change or people change. This isn't just about projects and activities. It can just simply be about how the other person acts or reacts suddenly. But it's that adaptability that's really critically important. Your achievement orientation is an aspect of self-management, right? Do you drive yourself to meet high standards and continuously improve? Um, as a matter of course, as a matter of life, as a matter of the way you show up in life, at work, at play. And even the aspect of taking initiative. How do you manage yourself in that way? Do you move without prompting? Do you take action and solve problems without anyone asking you or prompting you to do so? And then, of course, this fifth aspect I really, really love as it relates to self management, a positive outlook on life. I used to tell people all the time that I'm Voltaire's Candide, I'm the eternal optimist, right? I believe with all my heart in the old mantra, your attitude, I'm sorry, your altitude is determined by your attitude. That is true for others, and that is true for ourselves. And then finally, there's relationship management, your ability to influence, your ability to coach and mentor other people, right? How do you show up in those relationships? So it really is about influence and it's about inspiring and motivating others. It's about developing others. But you can't get all the way here unless you begin with self awareness. So let's take a deep breath for a second because there are some things that I think is worth thinking about and emulating, possibly. Those seven habits of highly emotionally intelligent people. Most of us have heard about the book, The Seven Habits of Highly Successful People, I believe, by Covey. Highly effective people, I think, is the actual title. And so this is kind of a spin on that. Again, there are so many thought leaders out there who have their own version of the seven habits of highly emotionally intelligent people. This isn't mine, so I do not take credit for it. Nor do I own the licensing rights to it. But I think it's something that will allow us to begin to think in the direction of what are those habits that we can embrace. Well, first, folks in this space really seek to support others first. That is their default mechanism. This is not about what I can, usually about what I can get from myself first before I lean into supporting other people. Um, Emotionally thoughtful folks really understand that words matter. And many of us really will probably fight for the right and defend to the death the opportunity for folks in this particular country to exercise their First Amendment rights. I would be one of those people as well. But language matters. And then there's this whole notion of making assumptions. And we're all tempted to do that because we all have our own biases and our own prejudices that we carry with us through life, formed by all of the experiences that we accumulate through life. I did have a very, very interesting coworker some years ago that said this: I lead by assuming positive intent. That was a real lesson for me because obviously it still stick with me probably some 20, 25 years later. I lead with positive intent. We just don't assume. This is the opportunity, by the way, to something that I have erroneously said over the years was classified as, and that I called eunonia. Beautiful question. Eunonia is not beautiful question. Eunonia is beautiful thinking, but beautiful thinking drives beautiful questions. Asking questions the right way at the appropriate time in the appropriate context really does help. And it usually signals, by the way, that if you're probably asking questions to understand instead of presuming, then that probably also means that you're listening. And Simon Sinek have already given us our lesson for that. Embracing silence, and leveraging silence to work in conversations with helping other people see themselves better, helping other people perform better, sometimes isn't about talking and directing. It really is oftentimes about allowing people the opportunity between comments and conversation to rest in the moment, to be able to process that. And then, of course, we said a little bit earlier about seeking to support. That focus on others is really critically important. Admitting our mistakes and doing it, owning those things openly, showing and allowing for folks to see our vulnerability gives us a certain level of credibility that even money can't buy. And of course, we talked about assumptions a little bit earlier, but this is another aspect to it, not assuming the worst. This is all about that positive outlook mindset that we discussed earlier. 7 habits of highly emotionally intelligent people. And so I know that somebody probably here right now on the call is really kind of wondering, so what else is there? I mean, are there any things that we can take away in terms of the opportunity or the ability to maybe practice? Well, I'm glad you asked the question. And before we get to that, I want to do just one more little brief poll. Of those 7 habits of highly emotionally intelligent people, again, I mentioned superpowers a little bit earlier in our conversation today, but for you, for you, which of the 7 habits, I know you probably want to pick more than one, but just for you, which one of those habits do you practice the most? Just you, for you. I suspect you practice more than one of them and you feel really good about it, but just the one that you do the best. Try to see what we got here.
We're about at 65%, so we'll just wait.
Folks are weighing in. Fantastic. Which one of these habits do you personally practice the most?
All right, we've got about 75%.
Beautiful. Let's see what we got. Seeks to support by far, 44%. Fantastic. There's some other good ones there as well. This is really designed. Thank you all for participating in this. This particular poll was really actually designed not because we're just sort of nosy folks and curious creatures, although we are probably curious creatures, but it's to encourage you to think in another way about how you can show up more effectively as a leader in your ability to be able to coach and help other people see themselves, seeing yourself better first. The other reason I wanted to go through this exercise, quite frankly, is because more often than not, we really do tend to focus on the maybe some of the more critical aspects or the negative aspects of the way in which we perform or the way in which others perform. Sometimes your superpower can be your best friend if it's not over leveraged. And so this is an opportunity, hopefully an encouragement for you to not just be more thoughtful about how you can leverage more your most practiced habit, but maybe even give yourself some homework and think about which one of these can I do just a little bit better? Can I do more of? Thank you. Okay, so we're down to the wire, and we've got maybe just a couple more slides. This one is what I was alluding to earlier when I said, now what? And so here are some things to think about. Again, the interesting thing about the World Wide Web is that it does not have a lack of information and feedback and expert opinions about what works. I'm not suggesting to you that these are the only things that work, but these are some good things to consider, and there may be many, many others. So 5 techniques to develop your emotional intelligence. Well, let's start where sometimes we intersect almost on a daily basis, and that is with your stress level. Identify what your stress level is and how you may respond to those things, and work in the direction of improving your level of stress. If you're stressed out, that's only going to have a ripple effect in terms of how people around you see it and feel it and respond to it. Recognizing and managing your emotions is really critically important. So the question becomes recognizing that in whichever way works for you. That might be in the vein of journaling. That might be along the lines of taking some of those a different version of a know thyself quiz, but it relates to emotions only. Those kinds of things. One of the things that we've really found out over the course of time, and that is community matters. And so connecting with other people and focusing on other people, but collaborating with other people and communing with other people is really super critical in the way in which we develop and evolve our emotional intelligence. It allows us to give ourselves permission to hold others in as much regard as we hold ourselves. And so you can sort of challenge yourself, if you will, and encourage yourself to even practice, for example, reading the nonverbal cues that other people give you. And there's a ton of different um, exercises out there, professional exercises that you can do for yourself and that you can do with other people that can help you get better at these kinds of things. Using humor and play is so critically important. I love this piece because it's something that most of us don't think about very often. I'm always reminded when I do this piece. I was very fortunate to start up a couple of different consulting practices in the past. In one instance, I had several partners, and I'd never forget, we were in the middle of a very, 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 very heated argument all day long. We were just talking about critical, strategic sort of things. What do we want to do? How do we expand the business? All that good stuff. And one of them stopped the rest of us in our tracks and said, "Oh my God, all this fighting is just killing me. Does anybody know a joke?" Nobody told a joke, but everybody burst out laughing just because of that comment. And it taught me something in that moment about how we might be able to use humor and play to help handle challenges for ourselves and for others. And then finally, I would just make a quick point about this one in terms of resolving conflict positively, because one of the things that I know for all of us, and even today, I continue to almost surprise myself at the amount of stress that I give myself permission to have and to hold whenever I think I'm in conflict with a situation or with an individual. And the truth of the matter is that conflict doesn't always have to be negative. It can be constructive, it can be positive. Many of you, excuse me, many of you may know of Stephen Covey. He passed away some years ago, but he created an incredible global consulting practice to help leaders be more effective. And he wrote, and I think this may have been the last thing that he did, but he created this model and this process called the third alternative. I want to recommend it to each and every one of you right now. Read the book if you like to read. If not, you might be able to find something on YouTube or whatever. But the gist of it is simply this. He encouraged leaders that when you're involved or engaged in conflict with other folks, a way to positively resolve conflict might be to just ask a simple question. There's more to it, right? He wrote a whole book around it, but it's about asking a simple question. There's usually your side, and then there's my side. And I can hear some of you right now at least thinking, and then there's the right side. But the truth of the matter is that when folks are engaged in conflict, it's hard to kind of see because you're thinking that you're giving in to the other person. But a good way to resolve that conflict positively is through the third alternative, which is this: inviting the other person to suspend, not put away, not give up their role or their position or what they're thinking about the situation in the moment. Just suspend it, just pause it. Would you be willing to work with me to see if there is a way that we might be able to come up with something that neither one of us have thought about that might be the solution? Just for a moment. It really opened my eyes. And in my coaching practice, I share that at appropriate times, but I share that with a lot of leaders. The third alternative, beautiful way of resolving conflict positively. So now the time is well spent. And um, I usually don't care for webinars or workshops or seminars and that sort of thing that doesn't invite action. Bottom line. So I want you to take a moment, get that same favorite writing instrument that you had a little bit earlier, maybe even that same piece of paper if you still got room on it, or grab another sticky note, another piece of paper, and take a moment to answer these questions for yourself. What's the one thing, just one, what's the one thing you'll do in the next week, in the next 7 days to become more self-aware? Go ahead, write it down. Most of you have probably already written it down. Just the one thing that you'll do. Keyword, full sentence. What's that one thing? And one of the things that executive coaching has taught me is that it's beautiful when leaders build. And that's what leaders are. That's what they do. They're like carpenters, right? They build. But just like carpenters, right? When you're building the structure, you're building the edifice, it still needs some level of maintenance. Same thing with leaders, right? They still need to sustain the teams. They still need to help individuals sustain their performance effectiveness, as well as their own. And so then the second question becomes this: how will I hold myself accountable for my success with this commitment? Here's the one thing I'm going to do in the next week. But typically, accountability invites further reflection, further thoughtfulness, further actions to make sure that I keep doing what I said I'm going to do, especially as it relates to becoming more self-aware. So I'll give you a couple seconds with that. How will I hold myself more accountable? Maybe one thing, maybe several things. It may be making a pact or an agreement with a coworker or a subordinate or a friend. How will I hold myself accountable? Okay, deep breath. I think we're there. We've got just a couple of more minutes left. I am grateful for the opportunity to be able to spend some time with you in what I call the living room today, to be able to explore a topic that's really powerful. And the beautiful thing about it is that it allows us to just really take a deep breath, look in the mirror, I call it, because sometimes we can hold our own mirror, Being great coaches is about holding the mirror up for others, but being effective allows us to be able to turn the mirror around so that we can see too. And so I just want to invite you to continue to think about this topic, continue to think about its value in the work that you do as great leaders, whether you're HR folks or coaches or trainers or whatever it is that you do. But I do believe also that most importantly is this: listen, learn, love, and then lead. So that is it. Thank you very much for your trust. If there are any questions, Aaron, I think we may have another minute or two to before
Yeah,
we all sign off.
I have a couple questions here. One of them is, how do you balance empathy with accountability?
Uh, that's a great question. Well, it's not a zero-sum game. That's a great question, as a matter of fact, but it's not a zero-sum game, right? Like, just sort of showing empathy is really sort of putting yourself in the walking in someone else's shoes, so to speak, walking in someone else's moccasins, they used to say. But that is not an excuse for an individual to come through. That is not an excuse for an individual to continue to be responsible for performance in their role. Those are two completely separate things. I can have a heart for you and your situation. It may be highly personal. Somebody may be challenged with a deep a serious medical issue. It could be any of those things, right? But at the end of the day, that still doesn't absolve them from the responsibility that they may have to do their jobs. And so I think that that's the first place, right? It's just recognizing that you can address both, you can live with both in the relationship, in the coaching space, in the leadership space.
Great. Well, I appreciate it. And I think probably time to wrap it up.
Great. Thanks again. I appreciate it.
Thank
Stay
you.
safe and be well.
Thank you, everybody.